Power brokers have wrapped up the World Economic Forum's annual conclave in Davos, Switzerland, as worries about the war in Ukraine, a warming planet, and a cooling global economy dominated the discussions. Climate activist Greta Thunberg and around 30 other activists braved sub-zero temperatures Friday to stage a protest calling for climate justice. The protesters chanted they want climate justice and they want it now. Thunberg held up a sign saying, "Keep it in the ground." She was detained by police in Germany earlier this week during a demonstration against the expansion of a coal mine. The oil and gas industry, which has been accused by activists of hijacking the climate change debate, says that it needs to be part of the energy transition as fossil fuels continue to play a major role in the energy mix as the world shifts to a low-carbon economy. The World Economic Forum is wrapping up in Switzerland Friday, and representatives at the forum sought partnerships with other nations to digitize, build infrastructure, and create job opportunities on the continent. I'm joined live now via Skype from Davos by Boaz Blackie Keizire. He's the head of policy and advocacy at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Boaz, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us how the forum addressed the food crisis in Africa that we're witnessing and we haven't seen in recent years.
I think the Forum 2023 has been a very phenomenal gathering, more importantly because the Forum is coming at a time when the continent and the global world is emerging from three big crises. One is the challenges that have been associated with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and more importantly, the difficulties and challenges that have been inflicted on Africa's agriculture. Secondly, the forum is coming at a time when we're just emerging out of the COVID-19 crisis and all the disruptions that may have been created. But more importantly, the forum is coming at a time where the world is actually challenged by climate change and climate disruptions in the way we grow our food. So partners are actually discussing several issues here. They are really trying to find solutions on the extent to which we can actually mitigate climate change challenges. For Africa, we have one big issue. One is to make sure that the African smallholder farmers are able to adapt climate change because they cannot mitigate because they are not contributing to the climate change itself. But there is a very, very good discussion that are emerging in terms of how do we push the Western countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, at the same time making sure that they are increasing financing for Africa's agriculture. So there is a lot of discussion that are happening in Davos, and I'm glad that that these discussions are yielding results.
And as you return to the continent of Africa, Africans are waiting to hear what the representatives for the continent are going to be taking back there. And what are the key issues that you put on the table and perhaps the solutions that you're going to be offering when you return?
I think so from the food systems perspective, there are quite a number of issues that we need Africans to listen to, but also the African representatives to be able to put on the table. The first key important part is that, in my view, Africa wasn't sufficiently represented at the highest level. I'm glad to announce that the president of Tanzania, I think he's the one who was in Davos, but there are other voices from the continent that have joined different discussions. So there are major issues. One is climate change. And we are thinking of new solutions on how do we make sure that we are adapting climate change. Issues related to regenerative agriculture, for example, making sure that farmers are able to increase production and productivity of agriculture without disrupting the environment, without encroaching on wetlands, without cutting forests. Two, the whole issues around increasing financing to the very critical issues that affect agriculture and food systems in Africa. But lastly, and more importantly, is the markets. One of the biggest issues that farmers respond to is if they are functional markets, they will be able to adapt to new technologies. They will be able to buy the right seeds. They'll be able to access the right fertilizer. They'll be able to actually get the right extension to be able to increase production. So the market is a very big incentive. And that's why the representatives in Davos are speaking to the big market leaders, those who are actually into the space and making sure that you don't actually create the African market, but also making sure that agriculture products are able to access both the European, the American, and other parts of the world markets. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area has been also be able to discuss some of those issues. And we are glad this is happening. here in Davos.
Boaz, tell us about the big talk about digital revolution in Africa and what your vision is to digitize the continent and how that will be effective in creating jobs, especially for the youth in Africa.
I think this is one of the major revolutions that is happening on the continent. I'm so glad that the African and the African constituency, especially the youth, are jumping onto this bandwagon. This has been one of the major topics here in Davos, to make sure that we take advantage of the digitization of different aspects of agriculture value chains and also in the non-agriculture economic spaces. One of the key areas that I think Africa needs to pay attention to is to increase the kind of infrastructure that will absorb and be able to accommodate the digitization revolution. And I am so glad that most of the investing community are also looking at Africa as a very potential area where they can go to. So digitization is very critical. Creating jobs is going to be at the center of every Africa leaders' discussions. And we're going to be encouraging and working with countries to put in place the right policy, regulatory environment for increasing digitization to be able to create jobs in different sectors of the economy.
Boaz, thank you so much for your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Boaz Blackie Keizire is the head of policy and advocacy at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa.